Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're so glad to welcome you as part of our community tonight. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and distributed live stream. By entering this virtual meeting room, you give your consent to be recorded and distributed by Simeon Morrow Public Speaking Presentations, Vienna Live with Simeon Morrow, and other third parties. If you prefer to not be recorded, please turn off your camera and microphone or go to the LinkedIn Live video feed, the link to which I'll now place in the chat room. For a better experience, please turn off your microphone and set your video to gallery view. This show thrives on participant contributions, and all participants are encouraged to actively participate in this webinar by asking questions and making comments. To do so, please either write in the chat room, raise your hand, or turn on your microphone and say hi, and I'll be delighted to include your perspective in the conversation. Tonight, our featured guests are the members of the Arianna String Quartet, violinists John McRosso and Julia Sakharova, violist Joanna Mendoza, and cellist Kurt Baldwin. All four are professors of music at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Also joining us tonight is Dr. Lino Rivera, professor of music at St. Mary's College of California. And just briefly before we move on, why do you think diversity is important? As you said, it's not just about having African Americans represent a larger amount of staff or students, or people that look different, or the women who first came then in the 1970s to Dartmouth. So you have, it's about this different perspectives, probably people coming from different angles, with different interests, just like you coming from upstate New York with a completely different perspective than people from Boston, say. So what is it that you see in diversity? Why do you believe in that?
Yeah, so I know the research literature, and there are decades of studies which show that a diverse set of perspectives do better at making some important kinds of decisions, predictions, creative problem solving than do single experts. So I know that diversity leads to better outcomes as long as there's inclusion. It has to be both diversity and inclusion. It can't. So when different perspectives mix, that you achieve stronger intellectual outcomes in many ways. So we not only need our students to understand that, to have lived that, but we also need to help them practice that. And so our campus is a perfect place to introduce our students to this idea that they should listen to multiple perspectives, that there's nothing, it will only make their decision making better. It'll make their problem solving better. So we need them to live that, practice it, understand it, but at the same time, we're trying to solve problems through our research too. And so we need the diverse set of perspectives on our campus to actually help us do better and more impactful work as we take on the issues of the world.
So that was Philip J. Hanlon, president of Dartmouth College, whom I interviewed just a few weeks ago. And of course, the main topic of our conversation was this so-called acronym DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, which was completely foreign to me as I spent most of my adult life abroad, and especially during the tumultuous past several years in the Western world. I heard about the Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter movement, but diversity, equity, and inclusion was not something I ever heard of. So when I became acquainted with that in the US, as I'd invite different guests to come on this show, and they'd talk about diversity and equity, and I thought equity had to do with insurance. but it turns out that this is a new, very talked about term that's used quite often. So I was grateful that today we have the Arianna String Quartet here to discuss how diversity, equity, and inclusion relates to chamber music. So I just like to say furthermore that I attended the Chamber Music America conference in January, and that's also, that was the talk of the day. That was pretty much all they talked about. And their definition of it is, first of all, I'd like to say how they define chamber music and how the DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, is included in that. Quote, Chamber Music America defines chamber music as music composed for small ensembles with one musician per part, generally performed without a conductor. Chamber music, quote unquote, once referred only to Western classical music for small ensembles, such as string quartets. But today, chamber music encompasses myriad forms, including contemporary and traditional jazz, classical, and folkloric genres. CMA's work is predicated on the belief that these genres have more in common than they differ, and that each represents an equally valuable contribution to American culture. So with that in mind, I mean, I couldn't help but think about a course I took on chamber music, which was my introduction to music and society some years ago. And in that course, they brought to our attention that Haydn, in his Opus 20 quartets, was writing really first violin heavy music that was in which the first violin was really, it was like a sonata for first violin and string quartet, and that the last movements were these fugues that were all really based on the same material that the first violin was playing. And so really hierarchical music, and that changed in the Opus 33 when already we had those big changes coming in Western society, in which it was the individual's humanity was an individual thought, and so-called diversity was becoming more and more valued. And of course, Beethoven, Haydn's student, would become eventually, the standard bearer of that. So then in Haydn's Opus 33 quartets, there was suddenly a musical diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy that he devised, in which each instrument formed an equal part of the conversation, influenced the conversation, and wasn't just nodding in agreement. So I'd like to bring in John McRoso. John, hi.
Hey, how are you? Great to be here. So we have a movement of Haydn to play. This is Opus 76, number 4, which we'll play the first movement. And I'd just like to say at the beginning that our idea of the quartet as the way we think quartets could function and as they're a model for society really has to do with this sort of interaction, this sort of continual interaction and continual valuing of each part by each player. The idea of equity isn't so much that everyone is the same as much as it is that everyone is valued equally in what they have to contribute. And we're sort of following Haydn's map for us, so we don't decide where the melody goes. Haydn really decided that, for instance, a long time ago, just as far as the melody is concerned, who has it. But really how each of us will be influencing that at any given point is really something that we value and that we explore in our rehearsals. So we'll play the first movement and then we'll talk some more.
Applause all around. Fantastic. So, John, so give us a little bit of an introduction to how you rehearsed that and what that means when we talk about being equal partners in this, as opposed to what does that mean? Especially, I mean, I heard Kurt, Joanna playing I believe that's a second theme with these half step motives that it seems that, you know, if they just hold you in their hand, if they play a certain way, then you're going to naturally respond in a certain way. Tell us all about that.
Well, one of the principles of the string quartet is, of course, there are only four of us. And so in order to create enough variety, the composer is always playing with the mathematical possibilities of the quartet. One of the things that we often say is, you know, there's 6 duo possibilities in the quartet. There's a duo here, a duo there, a duo there, and a duo here, and then duos across. And then also 4 different combinations of 3 instruments that the composer is working with. And so as part of the composer's search for variety and drama, the composer is always playing with these different combinations. And so as players, we have to be responsive to that. We have to be looking for that. We have to be looking for how the composer is building the drama through combining us and recombining us all the time. So that's certainly part of the responsiveness that we need to have to one another and to the needs of the score. Additionally, you know, any chord that we play is going to be based on a root and a third and a fifth. And what we found is that in order for that chord to sound really good, really balanced, it's actually not to play those 3 equally, but instead to play the root maybe with a slightly slower bow, the third making sure that that's very present and maybe with a slightly faster bow, and then to have less fifth. And what we found is that we need to be responsive to that always to one another. So for instance, if the person who's playing the third, if they don't know that they have the third, then everything has to be rebalanced. But as soon as the third is played with more bow, that creates space for the others. And sort of thinking socially, then it's sort of that we cannot pull into our part and be in our own socioeconomic group or be on our own neighborhood and sort of like pull up the drawbridge from the rest of town and survive. The health of the music, or the expression of the music, is based on this fully functioning society that we need to create. And that's what we look for in our rehearsals. That's what we're trying to explore in our rehearsal process, and then also on stage when we're performing.
Okay, John, and could you maybe give us 2 examples, one of the duos and one of the chords?
Certainly, if we play from 60, it would be the sort of the duos. Sure. So here you'll really hear how the violins are together and then answered by the viola and cello. And then there's a new duo that's formed in the fourth bar between the viola and second violin. And then I'm responding to that. So that's a pretty clear example of the way that's working. And then just really as far as the chords are concerned, we could just play the opening is really the best way to do that. We have a B flat major chord that begins the piece, and Kurt has the root, and Julia has the third, and Joanna has the fifth. And the fifth is sort of like the stabilizing factor. The third is more the color and the expressive, and the root is the identity. So
And
that's kind of how we
John, maybe could you play first without the third and then have the third come in?
So here, it's really a question of what does this mean? Because, yeah, you could play.
The third is really a decisive point because it could be a major or minor, right? So that's where we're gonna hear the third now.
And
Or is it this?
fantastic.
And what we found is that the responsiveness of the root and the fifth need to change if we're playing a major chord or a minor chord. So it's not as if just this one note is different, but the whole chord is different.
The chemistry of it changes.
And if it were a minor, if you guys were to play minor at the beginning, it would be quite different than major.
Fantastic. So, and I'm sorry, Joanna, can you repeat that?
Even the speed of our sound changes, right? Part of it wasn't just that the third was lower in the minor, but that our response to that, we all had to respond together to that change in quality. And that happened in just how the speed with which we played.
And Joanna, maybe we can go on with you with this conversation. Tell us about the viola's role in that, and also your role in the chamber music, how the quartet would change if you weren't there, in especially
Right.
this quartet, in the
Well,
Arianna String Quartet in Haydn.
I think one thing, philosophy that we have, that I think quartets have, is that every part in the quartet is crucial. And it's so difficult to write for a string quartet. There's nowhere to hide for the composer, nowhere to hide for the players. And for that reason, the composer writes exactly what he or she intends, right? That it and so everything is so important and is contributing something. And so as the violist, where in earlier music, like Haydn's music, I won't often have the melody, but I'll have this kind of the energy. I will be responsible for the energy and the direction and the shape and the color within the sound. And so it feels more like I'm leading from the inside. You know,
Can you give us an example of that?
Sure. Let's see.
Or
Have that at 86, 87. I mean, it's not, but it's contraline sort of. I don't know if that's.
We can show that in Mendelssohn probably easier.
Yeah.
you know, we can,
Or
in a
135.
sense, we can show it,
135.
yeah, you know, right at the allegro.
Mhm.
Because, because if I think of myself just as less important or least important and don't contribute as much, I think you'll be able to tell the difference.
And maybe could even, and maybe what if you played first just your part, or they play without you, and then you play
Okay.
together?
Sure.
Oh, not you, maybe.
Yeah, maybe just you
Okay.
without me. And I
And
could play differently. If we could play that one more time, and I'll play differently, and I think you'll hear a difference here too.
Made my life much harder.
So,
Made my life much more difficult. And I didn't feel like I could play with a kind of forward energy because I could feel a lack of support or a lack of direction from that in that role.
so in my part, what's written is, if I just play that according to those star exercises that we did in oral training in school, it would be very even, and practice with the metronome, and it would all be correct. But that's not the music. The music is moving forward, and I have to be just as responsible for the melody, for the main line, as John. And in fact, you know, Julia and I can very much make his life really, really difficult. So in a sense, we're even more powerful from the inside.
And Kurt, maybe we'll continue with you. So about this, I think Joanna's getting at that in the score, you all look equal. You all are just, your parts are listed one above the other. Doesn't have that social aspect that John was talking about. You know, now tell us about the Arianna String Quartet. So I think you I might even have been one of the founding members. I'm not sure, but tell us about this, what that means when you have individuals. And what comes to mind is I especially would want to mention that, okay, well, you're 2 men and 2 women. And I remember hearing in my university days, then people saying, oh, well, yeah, if it's just 4 men, all they do is they talk about women. If it's 4 women, all they do is talk about men. So if they've got 2 men, you've got 2 women, then it's kind of, everybody just gets down to business about music. So tell us what is this dynamic, and what does that mean when you bring your individuality to Haydn? So it's no longer Joseph Haydn, it's Joseph Haydn, the Arianna String Quartet.
Right. I think, of course, every quartet, like every family, has a different way of communicating and operating and having a symbiotic relationship. I think one thing we should mention too about being in a string quartet is that we always think of the composer being in the room. That Haydn is sitting in the corner, and if we have a question, we use the score to look at what he wrote for all 4 parts to say, why does the cello have this, or why does the viola, what is that adding? Joanna always makes a great point that everything in the score is there for a reason, even the rests, even the silences, and we have to have asked that question, like why did he or she put that there? I think for us, one of the things that we hit on very early, when the quartet began, the quartet was very young. This was like 30 years ago, and we were still working from the information we'd gotten from our teachers very freshly from school. And one of the things that we realized is it's possible to be put together as an ensemble and get a result and not really know how you got that result. So the tradition in chamber music is that you get coached and someone listens to you, and then they'll say a little more from you, a little less from, go a little faster here, go a little slow, and you end up with this, and then they say, that's it, that's great. And you really don't know why you did what you did or how you how you got to that point, how you got to the solution in the process, because someone else is kind of in charge of that process. Becoming a professional ensemble means you have to own the process. You have to be completely a part of that. And one of the things John just touched on this briefly a second ago is while we celebrate the absolute equality of all the parts, what we're actually celebrating is the inequality of the equality, the equality of the inequality. So for a composer to create variety, they have to keep changing the roles. If it stays monochromatic with a leader and 3 followers, or it becomes one-dimensional, it becomes uninteresting. And this is, for us, this relates to society, the nuance of flexibility in how we relate to other people, take turns stepping up. So it's sort of, we see string quartets or chamber music, even a great pianist, and our colleague can talk about this, a great pianist who voices 2 hands is playing unequally, has 10 fingers that are equal but unequal at the keyboard. And so that's something that we're striving to do all the time. I think there are acoustic issues and issues of physics that we have to take into account. The cello having bigger strings and a slower response rate than the violins. We work to counter that so that we sound together, we sound blended. So when John mentioned how we work on blend or ensemble, it's always through shared leadership and the roles changing all the time. So when we go on stage, we're not trying to recreate something we did in rehearsal. We're taking an organization of the score out so that we can be free to expound upon that in the moment. And as the cellist, I think my role, largely I play bass lines. Largely I'm providing foundation, but I have to also provide mobility and motion in the sound, because the moment one of my colleagues has a melody and has to lead me, has to show me where to go, I'm behind, and the audience will hear it being behind. So what Joanna just mentioned about that shared responsibility is constant. And one of the things that inspires us each day is that when we come in, this is not something you can have one day and not the other day. You have to every day be in that heightened level of sensitivity to what's possible.
And to follow up on that then, Kurt, what happens when, you'll have your students and they are all playing as if they were equally important. What do you tell them?
Well, this is one of the things that I think makes some of our teaching, I think, unique, is that we instead of coaching them down, we show them we try to show them how to be empowered by that inequality, because they're going to have to be ready to step back and lead the very person that they're supporting in one moment. And so we always show it through the score, and I think this is something that we didn't get when we were students in school. Some of it is intuition. Some of it you can tell, like, this doesn't sound well. But I think being able to come to find some sort of proactive solution is what we try to teach. It's difficult for students because I think human nature, when we play together, is we all want to do well, so we all put in a lot. And when someone says you're putting in too much, it's very easy then to overreact, not intentionally, but just to pull back too far. And it's a much finer line. I think of it almost like airplanes flying in formation. You have to respect the leader and the follower, and those roles will change. But on stage, we need each other. We need each other at every moment. So we try to show that to our students.
Fantastic. That's lovely. So before we get to Julia, maybe I understand you've got another piece by an American composer?
Yes, we have a movement of a piece called Spiritual Fantasy Number 12, and it's by Frederick Tillis. It's an African-American composer who just passed away. This piece was written in 1995, and it's based on the spiritual Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen. This is actually the first of a 4-movement work that we really enjoy playing a lot. it'll have some similarities that you'll hear, the audience can hear, to the Haydn in terms of there's often three people sustaining a note while the fourth person is playing something that's more melodic. And so we'll be using some of those same techniques then that we used in the Haydn in order to be listening to each other, find the color of those sustained notes so that the fourth voice is free to move around.
Wonderful, haunting. Wow. So Julia, let's go over to you now. Tell us about this. Let's follow up on what Kurt was saying about the inequality. And so you're playing the second violin part. I don't think that you exchange parts with John. I think he's always playing the first violin, and you're playing the second violin part, I think.
Let's ask John.
Yeah, yeah. And so what is it?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, yep. Uh-huh.
Yeah, you
So,
okay.
tell us about this power dynamic there in the quartet. And I mean, John, he started off the show. He was talking. You know, he's kind of the front man. So tell us about that, and then tell us about the difference between that and you as a soloist. I know you worked with Sean Hickey. He loved working with you as a soloist for his composition, and then with your teaching. And I'm saying this because I remember in the Netherlands once I was told, you know, you in the United States, you know, you can't have a junior person go to a manager, you know, and tell that manager a good idea. He said, here in the Netherlands, even if you work on the Coke machine, you can go to the CEO and tell them if you've got a good idea. And I thought, well, maybe that's not great. Maybe that's not a good idea to have that happen. You know, as a violinist, you've been trained so that you know the right way, and you're passing that on to the other students. I imagine that diversity, equity, and inclusion doesn't mean that they come to you and say, well, you're wrong, you know, I should play the violin like this. There's a reason. You are the master. Tell us about that and how that dynamic fits in.
One almost hopes that this is always the case, right? Well, first of all, as far as quartet is playing, I want to say here and to everyone that's listening, this was always my aspiration and a hope to always play in the string quartet, because I just find this medium for myself really the best, because I'm able to express myself and yet I'm able to share this with other people. Whereas I love playing as a soloist, don't get me wrong too, but it's a different kind of performing and playing, and also playing in the orchestra, which I've done also for a number of years, which I truly enjoyed. That is a different kind of excitement. So for me, playing in the string quartet really means that I'm able to accomplish both, or if not more than two things, where I can truly express everything that composer has written, yet as also contributing and sharing with my colleagues. So this is something that I've always cherished every time we play together. And my role, you mentioned role in the quartet, I feel like it's like in a choir, you're really in the middle of soprano and tenor line, which brings me to the point where I actually kind of bounce around between playing with John, and oftentimes we're in a duo of some sort, and then also very much heavily playing with Joanna, because our lines a lot of times they intercede, like in that Haydn that we played, Opus 76. There are a lot of places where we are just glued, and to that effect, I have a wonderful little joke, if you want to hear that. We like to say that a string quartet is like a bottle of wine, where his first violin is the label, cello is the bottle, and the middle voices are the wine. Well, that's all it means, that really, as Joanna mentioned previously, a lot of the drama happens in the middle. And oftentimes, you, as a listener, not necessarily aware of that, but the harmonic changes, the rhythmical power of changes, it all happens in the middle. So it's very powerful, that role. I feel like I'm really enjoying that, because I also feel like all these years that I play in the quartet, my harmonic, like I hear more, not that I didn't hear harmonies before, but I just feel like that part of my listening and hearing has really played a great part in that. So that to answer the quartet.
Wow. Okay. And just to follow up again on this aspect of gender disparity, I had a guest on talking about psychological safety, which is a term meaning it's an aspiration where anybody feels safe to bring up any idea. So I'm there at rehearsal with you, and then maybe I say, maybe we should not use our bows. And then I would bring up a thought like that, and then, then Julia would say to me, I'm so glad you feel safe enough to tell us something like that.
Yes, we feel fortunate. I can speak for everyone here in the room that we feel fortunate that we are able to express and share and bring different kinds of ideas and not to feel like you're going to be, looked down upon. So that is a very wonderful feeling. And you mentioned something about teaching. I had my personal growing up, I had some of the toughest teachers, and things that they would say, not just to me, but to other classmates. I doubt that that would fly right now in our society. That it's just it could have been very harsh. And so with my own students, I take an approach where I want to be demanding, because it's important for them to improve and to grow. But yet I want to be absolutely accommodating in the best possible way and approach them all as individuals and different people and with different needs and different aspirations and the goals. And so we work together and we meet each other in the middle. I think it's absolutely important that every teacher does it that way, the best possible way, because the result then, what you achieve is truly remarkable.
Fantastic.
So
And
without sacrificing the quality, of course, but always choosing the path that enables to bring the best out of the student.
fantastic. And before we move on, Julia, so one last question about sociology. So and society. So we began this conversation. I was talking to President Philip J. Hanlon from president of Dartmouth College, and he was telling me about why diversity and inclusion are so important in Dartmouth College. You, I imagine, also, as with your quartet and your students, are inside this bubble where they say, yes, we believe in this, that's important. I imagine that's not the case also for you and Joanna as women, outside, if you go at some other place outside of the ivory tower, and for other people who are in, I don't know, an abandoned town, where nobody really cares about them, or they don't feel, they don't understand why that's important. So tell us about also experiences, what you have experienced also, where, you understand you have, you're a master violinist. Nobody knows that better than you. And then somebody, because you're a woman, they say, oh, you don't know anything about the violin, or you don't know anything, shut up, or they don't even say those words, but that's what they're thinking. So tell us about that, because you're working with, the people who really understand that, you are,
I hear you, and there's so many things, bubbling in my head. But first of all, I think musicians, and chamber musicians in particular, classical musicians, and some of the smartest people, and actually could be a great politicians, because what we do in the quartet, it really demands this constant body language, the awareness of each other and compromise and sacrifice, and feel like if we were negotiating on the table, a lot of things could have been done maybe more peacefully somehow, because we are just so in tune with the composer and the score. And so taking that perspective and bringing that into conversation with politicians or just people outside, I think sometimes people honestly don't appreciate that aspect of or don't know about that aspect of classical training musicians, and particularly quartet players. And it's just by the nature of what we do, we're able then to bring that perspective on the table. The other thing I wanted to mention, as far as inclusion and diversity, I came to this country about 20 years ago, and I as an immigrant, I came as a student, but I'm so proud to be in this country, and ever since then, because I've always felt, as a foreigner, I felt very included, and a lot of people helped me on my journey where I am right now, and so I am indebted to that, and I'd love to see everybody else around me experiencing that support, and if you, whatever background you are in, I personally feel in the same boat as people and wanting to include them, because I've been there, and so I know how important that is.
Inspiring. Thank you so much. So I believe we have a final selection, some Mendelssohn.
Sure. We have the first movement of the Mendelssohn Quartet in D major, Opus 44, number 1.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, the Arianna String Quartet. Let's see how we can stay in touch with them. Here is their website. It is ariannaquartet.com. And you can reach out to them under the contact and send them a message. Is that right, John? People can reach out to
Yes,
you?
absolutely, absolutely.
So
Yeah,
don't
thanks so
hesitate
much
to reach.
for having us today. We really enjoyed being a part of it and a part of this wonderful discussion. So
Thank you so very much to John McGrosso, Julia Sakharova, Johanna Mendoza, and Kurt Baldwin, the Arianna String Quartet. So let's see what's coming up next week. We have here the Merola Opera Program. There are many opera training programs around the world, but few are Merola's peers. The program's alumni, called Merolini, include Patricia Vasset, Dolores Sajic, and Rolando Villason, and form the singer class most sought after by the renowned post-war opera houses in Vienna, Berlin, Milan, Paris, London, and New York. But the opera scene is changing, and the days of the three tenors are past. New centers of opera excellence are prospering in the East, namely in China. And those centers are fostering talent pools of depths that the traditional opera centers could only dream of. Come welcome to our show the Marola Opera Program's Executive Director, Gene Kellogg, and two Marola returning artists, tenors Sahel Salam and Danielle Espinal, as well as their Eastern counterparts, Professors Niels Moos and Shi of the Central Academy of Drama, Beijing. These extraordinary administrators, professors, and artists will give us a look at the future of opera. As always, all information about upcoming shows may be found at www.simonmora.com. Again, that's next Wednesday, the Marola Opera Program. Once again, thank you so very much to the Arianna String Quartet. That is John McGrosso and Julia Sakharova, violins, Joanna Mendoza, viola, and Kurt Baldwin, cello. Thank you very much to Victoria and Frederick Mullen, as well as Agnieszka and Benoit Rivolet for their support of this show. Most of all, thanks to you, our participants, who make it all worthwhile. From New London, New Hampshire, and St. Louis, Missouri, goodbye, and see you next Wednesday.